Some movie sequels continue a story you loved, and some, like these, absolutely ruin them, for no good reason at all.
The original Species, released in 1995, follows a group of scientists trying to stop an alien-human hybrid intent on breeding with humanity. While the scientists are able to ultimately destroy the hybrid, the movie ends on a rat that's exhibiting some strange behavior after eating the corpse. Instead of following up on that plot thread, Species 2 just doubles down on the creepy, erotic themes of the first movie, portraying scientists trying to stop a brand new, mating-obsessed alien-human hybrid. That hungry rat and the implications that the genetic mutation can be introduced through food rather than intercourse is totally ignored. We'll never know what we missed.
And always making a pizza! There he goes!
What Children of the Corn started as a simple Stephen King short story about a group of kids in a Midwestern town worshiping a demonic entity, it's since spun into a massive franchise with nearly 10 movies and counting. Obviously, that's required a bit of an escalation from the original premise, which is what happens in Children of the Corn 3: Urban Harvest, when 2 Children of the Corn are adopted into foster care in Chicago. They bring corn.
That's nice looking corn.
Through a series of violent events, one of the children is able to summon the demonic corn monster to Chicago while also distributing mind-controlling corn all over the world. An entire world of mind-controlled children isn't a bad hook to hang a horror film on. Unfortunately, Children of the Corn 4: The Gathering would return the series to its roots, as it were, by taking things back to the Midwest, ignoring the worldwide implications of the previous film. There was only one appropriate reaction to the unrelated sequel.
Get that corn out of my face!
Like Children of the Corn, The Lawnmower Man is so far removed from the original story about a murderous, naked lawnmower man that King successfully sued to remove his name from the finished movie. The film follows Job, a greenskeeper who becomes a vengeful cyberspace god through a series of science experiments. Halfway through the film, Job promises to prove his godlike power by making every phone in the world ring simultaneously once he's achieved unlimited cybernetic control. An omnipotent, technology-controlling despot seems like a great place to start a sequel, but The Lawnmower Man 2: Beyond Cyberspace features a largely new group of characters in a cyberpunk Los Angeles. Job makes his return as an antagonist, but using a different actor. His triumph in the first film is ignored in favor of a retcon that left him crippled by the climactic explosion in the first Lawnmower Man. As one might guess given its title, the Bourne franchise is focused on the adventures of amnesiac assassin Jason Bourne. The formula worked so well that even when Matt Damon took a hiatus from the series, it moved on without him for 2012's The Bourne Legacy. Following Jeremy Renner as Bourne's fellow spy Aaron Cross, the film tried to capitalize on the world building of prior films with a character similar to Jason Bourne and a familiar story. Unfortunately for them, the movie premiered to mixed reviews and an ambivalent audience. The filmmakers heard that message loud and clear when they completely ignored the ending of The Bourne Legacy, which featured Cross wounded after a shootout and a close escape on a boat. The next sequel, Jason Bourne, forgets about any boat-related cliffhangers, putting the focus squarely back on Damon's character.
The most significant cultural impact of the very long Friday the 13th film series is that it made homicidal maniac Jason Voorhees an iconic character. He's certainly intriguing and mysterious, and he kills with total fervor. Concealing his identity behind a creepy hockey mask, Jason looms so large that it's easy to forget that he's not the chief villain of every Friday the 13th movie. For example, his mother avenges his death in 1980's Friday the 13th, and he doesn't begin his killing spree until 1981's Friday the 13th Part 2. With its leading title and twist ending, 1985's Friday the 13th: A New Beginning sets up its own franchise for a soft reboot. In this, the 5th Friday the 13th movie, Jason's original killer, Tommy Jarvis, remains haunted by the murder. But when a Jason imposter hunts Tommy to avenge the death of his son, Tommy defeats the killer and takes on the identity and mask of Jason Voorhees. This means that in the next movie, Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, Tommy as Jason is the central villain, right? Nope! The 1986 sequel begins with Tommy, who's played by a different actor, digging up Jason's corpse to burn it. Unfortunately, he accidentally resurrects the killer, and with that, Jason lives to strike again. While 2015's Ant-Man is more comedic and absurd than a typical Marvel Cinematic Universe entry, the film's stakes remain very high. Dr. Hank Pym, played by Michael Douglas, develops a suit that can shrink a human. After he's kicked out of his company by his one-time protege, he recruits Scott Lang, played by Paul Rudd, to stop that villain from figuring out the same tech and using it to carry out unfathomable acts of evil. The whole point of Ant-Man then is to stop the all-important tech from getting into the wrong hands. But it does. A Hydra agent named Mitchell Carson flees Pym Technologies with some Yellow Jacket particles and runs off to parts unknown. Where does he go, and how does he use Yellow Jacket particles to advance his own agenda? Audiences never find out because neither of the sequels, Ant-Man and the Wasp, nor Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, follow up on Carson. When confronted with this lack of plot development, Ant-Man director Peyton Reed explained the unresolved cliffhanger. He told Cinema Blend, "There was a sequence where Ant-Man has an encounter with him, but then for a couple reasons, I felt like maybe we should leave those particles out there." In Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides, rakish and roguish pirate captain Jack Sparrow finally seems to have met both his romantic and adversarial match in Angelica, played by Penelope Cruz. She's a pirate as crafty and daring as Captain Jack, and she claims to be the daughter of the legendary Blackbeard. Oscar winner Cruz came on board the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise nearly a decade in and injected new energy into it. But on Stranger Tides would mark her and Angelica's one and only appearance in the series. Growing weary of Angelica's machinations and unwilling to trust her, Jack abandons her on a tiny island before returning to his life of independent piracy and heading off to find his lost ship. That's how the movie ends, but a post-credit scene shows audiences what happened next. A voodoo doll that looks like Captain Jack washes up on Angelica's island, and it's evident she plans to use the darkly magical object to exact revenge on him. Jack Sparrow dealing with a voodoo curse should have been a big part of the plot of 2017's Pirates of the Caribbean: Dead Men Tell No Tales. But it isn't. Angelica doesn't even show up in that sequel. The 2000s action movie franchise XXX positioned itself as an edgier James Bond series for a new generation. Vin Diesel stars as Xander XXX Cage, an extreme sports athlete who cheats death as a matter of course and is recruited by the NSA to be a top spy. Unlike the ongoing Bond franchise, which is primarily a string of self-contained movies, the three XXX films will follow a sequence of events. That makes a filmmaker's decision to ignore some cliffhangers very confusing to viewers. At the end of 2002's XXX, Xander Cage completes his mission and is enjoying some well-earned rest and relaxation when handlers approach him with his next big spy assignment. As the film ends, it's unclear if he's going to accept the job, and nobody ever finds out because Diesel didn't want to return for 2005's XXX State of the Union. The story goes that Xander Cage died off-screen, while Ice Cube plays a new agent named Darius Stone. But then Diesel returned in 2017 for the third film, XXX Return of Xander Cage, meaning the character never really died after all. Since launching in 1996, the Mission Impossible franchise has become one of the most successful action series of the past 30 years. 2011 saw the fourth entry of the franchise arrive in theaters, titled Mission Impossible: Ghost Protocol. It introduced a new team of IMF agents who are working with Ethan Hunt to try to clear their names after they are accused of planting a bomb in the Kremlin. These fresh additions to the series included Jeremy Renner's intelligence analyst William Brandt, Simon Pegg's field agent Benji Dunn, and Paula Patton's agent Jane Carter. After they are successful in their mission, Hunt gathers everyone together again at the end of the film and hands them another one, implying that this group will continue to work together as a new terrorist organization emerges. Unfortunately, fans never got to see any more of Carter despite the fact that other characters from the film reappeared in subsequent releases. With little mention of her, it is unclear where she is or what might have happened. Carter was seemingly set to return to the franchise, with rumors suggesting that she would have appeared in Rogue Nation, but scheduling conflicts meant her character was cut from the film. One of the defining aspects of the James Bond movies is that different actors have played 007 over the years. Of course, this tradition only arose because original actor Sean Connery left the franchise. When he departed following the release of You Only Live Twice in 1967, George Lazenby took on the role of the fictional spy in 1969's On Her Majesty's Secret Service. The latter film follows Bond as he tries to stop Blofeld from destroying the world's food supply. By the end of the movie, Bond has fallen in love with Contessa Teresa Tracy DiVincenzo, portrayed by Deanna Rigg. The two eventually marry, though the relationship is cut short when they're involved in a drive-by shooting at the hands of Blofeld and his henchwoman. Tracy is killed, and Bond is left devastated by the events. Producers were able to convince Connery to return for Diamonds Are Forever, and the opening scene shows Bond tracking down and killing who he believes to be the real Blofeld. Yet no explanation is given as to why he is so determined to dispatch the villain, and Tracy isn't mentioned at any point in the film. In fact, there are some suggestions in the opening moments that Bond is actually pursuing Blofeld directly after the events of You Only Live Twice. 20 years before his Spider-Man trilogy hit theaters, writer-director Sam Raimi launched his career with the cult horror flick The Evil Dead in 1981. Starring Bruce Campbell as a lovable Deadite slayer Ash Williams, it tells the story of a group of friends at a remote cabin who accidentally unleash demonic forces. When these demons begin to possess his companions, Ash is forced to take extreme measures to stay alive and ultimately escape from the carnage. When Evil Dead 2 was released 6 years later, it retconned the story of the original film, acting more as a remake than a direct sequel. The second film starts with a recap of the first movie, which drastically changes the plot and the events that occurred in The Evil Dead. Obviously, many viewers were left confused about what was going on, and why the sequel ignores what happened in the first entry of the series. The changes were largely a result of the fact that Raimi didn't have the rights to reuse his own footage from the first film. Therefore, he had to shoot certain scenes over again, while making some modifications along the way. This explains why Ash is seen returning to the cabin with a new girlfriend in tow, and without much mention of the friends of his who were present the first time around.
Oh, you bastards! Why are you torturing me like this? Why?
When Sylvester Stallone's Rocky was released in 1976, the scene was set for what would become one of the most successful sports movie franchises in history. The series focuses on the career of little-known boxer Rocky Balboa, as he grows into a worldwide sensation following a dramatic fight with heavyweight champion Apollo Creed. Rocky goes through some pretty tough times throughout the film series. By Rocky V, the Italian stallion is forced into retirement due to the physical toll of his fight with Ivan Drago. In fact, he's suffering from some serious brain injuries and takes up the job of a trainer, mentoring a new young boxer who is rising through the ranks. The 1990 film ends with Rocky getting into a street fight and leaving the sport for good. When Rocky returns in Rocky Balboa in 2006, the now 60-year-old former boxer comes back to the ring to fight an actual heavyweight champion who is in the prime of his career. The sixth installment essentially forgoes all of the lessons learned in the previous films, with a near-senior citizen continuing to fight despite his previous health scares and frailties.
No, Rocky, you suffered severe brain trauma.
Well, he could be wrong. Anybody could be wrong.
I don't think he is.
Well, he ain't God. Look, Agent, only God ain't wrong.
A foundational slasher series, the Halloween franchise first began in 1978, when John Carpenter introduced the world to the mass killer Michael Myers. Starring Jamie Lee Curtis as final girl Laurie Strode, the first film is a stone-cold classic. But as you might expect from a franchise that consists of 13 films and numerous other media properties, it was always going to turn into something of a convoluted mess. Regardless, it's still strange that Halloween H2O flat out dismisses everything that came after the 1981 film Halloween 2, ignoring an entire 3-film story arc that's centered on the character Jamie Lloyd. Jamie is Laurie's daughter who grows up with a foster family following the death of her mother. She becomes a target of a certain mass killer, and is eventually murdered during the events of Halloween: The Curse of Michael Myers. In Halloween H2O, it is revealed that Laurie never died at all, having faked her death to try and escape from Myers. Not only does this movie retcon her death, but it makes no mention of Laurie having a daughter, nor the events that take place during Jamie Lloyd's Halloween movies. Although the Resident Evil movie franchise is based on the video game series, the narratives and characters from the live-action films have generally been separate from the iconic Capcom IP. Largely the work of writer and director Paul W.S. Anderson, the sub-franchise began in 2002 with the release of Resident Evil, starring Mila Jovovich as protagonist Alice as she battles the malevolent Umbrella Corporation, and an outbreak of zombies. The first sequel arrived in 2004, with Resident Evil Apocalypse following Alice as she escapes from Umbrella and attempts to flee from the growing infestation in Raccoon City. 3 years later, Resident Evil Extinction continued the franchise with Alice now journeying through the Mojave Desert as the zombie infection has spread across the entire planet. One of the main gripes fans have had with this third film is the way that it has little connection with its predecessors and starts afresh while ignoring major events from both Resident Evil and Resident Evil Apocalypse. Examples of this include Alice's unexplained telekinesis powers, a worldwide apocalypse that happens completely off-screen, and a whole host of characters that have seemingly disappeared between the second and third entries.
I'm missing you already.
Steven Spielberg burst onto the Hollywood scene in 1975 when he directed the highly acclaimed thriller Jaws. A huge financial success, it spawned an entire franchise with multiple movies that involve various other sharks terrorizing the Brody family. The first, Jaws 2, arrived in 1978, while the most recent was Jaws: The Revenge in 1987. The immediate predecessor to this final film was the 1983 movie Jaws 3D. As the name suggests, it utilized 3D technology that required audiences to wear special glasses to get the full effect. The story largely follows a Brody family as Mike Brody attempts to stop a rogue great white shark at SeaWorld. Mike, portrayed by Dennis Quaid, works at the theme park and is in a relationship with a woman called Kay Morgan. The fourth film doesn't just ignore the ending of its predecessor, it doesn't acknowledge Jaws 3D in any way. In the later movie, Mike is a marine biologist rather than a SeaWorld employee. He is played this time around by Lance Guest and has a wife called Carla, and they both take on a shark that seems to have a personal vendetta against the family. For some though, the fact that Jaws the Revenge essentially pretended that Jaws 3D had never existed is for the best. After all, the film was panned by critics and fans. After the success of The Matrix, a film that grossed almost $500 million against a budget of just $63 million, the Wachowskis got to work on a pair of back-to-back sequels to conclude the story. The Matrix Reloaded sees Neo in full possession of his powers as the One, as he continues to work with Morpheus and Trinity to free humanity from the computer simulation. Reloaded actually ends with more than one cliffhanger. The first deals with the fact that Agent Smith has seemingly downloaded into the real world by taking over the mind of a human called Bane, with the film's final shot panning over his unconscious body next to Neo. The cause of Neo's passed-out state is shown a few minutes earlier when he helps the crew of the Nebuchadnezzar escape from a group of pursuing Sentinels. He somehow destroys them with the power of his mind, but the sheer effort causes him to fall into a coma. By the time the Matrix Revolutions happens though, this fact is pretty much discarded. There is never any real explanation given as to why Neo is able to destroy machines outside of the Matrix. The third film just moves forward without addressing the strange event, inviting fan theories that the real world of the cyberpunk franchise might just be another level of the simulation.
Why, Mr. Anderson? Why? Why do you persist?
Because I choose to.
When Highlander hit cinema screens in 1986, it introduced viewers to a group of immortal warriors that can only be killed by beheading. Christopher Lambert's character Connor McLeod is mentored by another immortal played by Sean Connery, who reveals how the immortals are locked in a centuries-long battle as they attempt to absorb each other's powers. The tagline of the film was famously, "There can be only one," but that didn't seem to apply to the movie itself. Highlander was followed by 2 films as well as novels, comics, and the television series. Highlander 2: The Quickening is undoubtedly the worst movie in the Highlander franchise. It basically tosses out every good idea from the first movie and goes on a bizarre new direction, revealing that the Immortals are actually exiled aliens from an ancient planet. A rare example of a film with a 0% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, the sequel proved to be a box office failure, and has largely been left forgotten in the series. Taking all that into account, it is easy to see why director Andrew Morahan and the writers behind Highlander 3 chose to ignore everything about The Quickening, instead suggesting that the third film is a true sequel to the original Highlander. Many fans don't consider Highlander 2 canon, and the fact that the film is so lousy is definitely part of the reason why.
You have the manners of a goat, and you smell like a dung heap, and you have no knowledge whatsoever of your potential.
The Boy is a 2016 release that follows nanny Greta Evans as she moves to the UK to watch a couple's child. When she arrives, Greta is shocked to learn that she is actually tasked with looking after a porcelain doll named Brahms. This figure is based on a young boy who was killed in a fire 20 years ago. His parents have struggled to move on and are obsessed with the doll. As the story progresses, it seems that the doll may actually have a life of his own. Near the end of the film, though, it's revealed that the human Brahms actually survived the fire and has been living in the walls as he moves the doll around. After the disturbed man attempts to kill Greta and her friend Malcolm, she manages to fatally stab him with a screwdriver, allowing them to escape. Brahms the Boy 2 acts as a direct sequel to the first film. Released in 2020 and taking place a number of years after The Boy, it sees a young family move into the home where the terrible events of the first film took place. The porcelain doll has somehow been repaired, and now he's definitely 100% possessed by a supernatural force. Considering that the big twist at the end of The Boy was that it's grounded in reality, the change makes the sequel a much different, much less entertaining movie. based on the 1991 novel of the same name by Bret Easton Ellis, American Psycho is a 2000 horror film that stars Christian Bale as serial killer Patrick Bateman. With the aid of his good looks, charm, and socially conscious yuppie persona, Bateman kills a variety of victims in gruesome ways while continuing to evade justice. The film concludes in a way that makes it unclear which of the events actually took place, if any, and whether Bateman is aware of the reality of his situation. American Psycho 2 is a standalone sequel that sees Mila Kunis take on the role of a serial killer who murders her classmates at university in an effort to secure a coveted position. There's little meaningful connection between the sequel and American Psycho, which is because the film was not intended to be a sequel originally. Instead, it was adapted from a screenplay entitled The Girl Who Wouldn't Die. That was not part of the same fictional universe. In American Psycho 2, Patrick Bateman appears extremely briefly and without clearly showing his face, obviously no longer played by Christian Bale. After Bateman is killed by a 12-year-old, it becomes clear that this is far from a proper sequel to Mary Harron's masterpiece. The beloved 1997 film Men in Black opens with Agent K on a mission with his longtime partner, Agent D. After D fumbles with his weapon and needs K to save him, D realizes he's too old for galaxy saving and decides to retire. Things eventually come full circle by the end of the film, with K revealing that he had been training a replacement rather than a partner in Agent J. After J memory wipes his friend, the older agent finally gets to return to his old life and the wife he had left behind over 30 years prior. Among the images at the end of the movie is a newspaper headline that shows the happy couple reunited at last. Despite the first movie establishing that Jay's new partner was meant to be Agent L, things didn't work out that way. Actor Linda Fiorentino didn't return for 2002's Men in Black 2. So instead, Tommy Lee Jones was brought back to team up with Agent J once again.
You're back.
No,
How'd you know his head would grow back?
it grows back.
Sadly, in universe, this means that Kay had to be pulled out of retirement and forced to once again leave behind the wife that he was frequently shown pining after in the first movie. In hindsight, it might seem like a no-brainer that the victory celebration at the end of the first Star Wars movie was going to be short-lived. But at the time when the movie was mostly known as Star Wars rather than Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope, it wasn't necessarily a foregone conclusion that a sequel was in the stars. That A New Hope ends the way it does with a lavish ceremony in which the heroes are awarded medals for dispatching the bad guys is proof of that. So the mere fact that the 1980 sequel, The Empire Strikes Back, even existed at all immediately showed that Luke Skywalker and Han Solo's awards may have been premature, to say the least. With each successive sequel showing things in the galaxy getting worse and worse, the lavish ceremony that ends A New Hope has felt increasingly more jarring and out of place. With Austin Powers being a parody of James Bond and other movie spies of the 60s and 70s, it was to be expected that he wasn't going to stay settled down with Vanessa Kensington, despite the 1997 movie ending with their marriage. Besides, trailers and advertisements for the 1999 sequel Austin Powers: The Spy Who Shagged Me featured a whole lot of Felicity Shagwell. So Vanessa had to be pushed aside to allow for Austin and Felicity to hook up. And pushed aside Vanessa was in the very first scene of the movie. During the couple's romantic honeymoon, Austin makes a discovery that his wife is a fembot when she attacks him and self-destructs. She was apparently a fembot all along, despite being the daughter of Austin's partner from back in the 1960s. Does that make any sense? Not really. But if you ask Basil Exposition, it doesn't really matter.
I suggest you don't worry about this sort of thing and just enjoy yourself. That goes for you all, too. Yes.
The mid-2010s were a dark time for comedy movie sequels, as cult favorites like Anchorman and Joe Dirt were dusted off for extremely disappointing follow-ups. Part of that trend was 2016's Zoolander 2, in which Ben Stiller returned as a titular supermodel. The original Zoolander received only a lukewarm critical reception and didn't exactly set the box office on fire like supermodels carelessly frolicking in gasoline. But it obviously had enough fans for Stiller to be able to direct and star in a sequel 15 years later. For whatever reason, Stiller and his co-writers decided to restart the story by having the Derek Zoolander Center for Kids Who Can't Read Good and Who Want to Learn to Do Other Stuff Good Too collapse just 2 days after opening, killing his girlfriend Matilda in the process. If you thought Matilda was killed off because of issues with actor Christine Taylor, you'd be wrong. She reprised her role as Matilda's ghost to give Derek's new love interest a blessing.
Go to her, Derek.
You're cool with it?
I'm totally cool with it. I'm dead.
Perhaps Taylor was only available for a single day of shooting. Whenever people talk about how terrible movie adaptations of video games typically are, it's because movies like Mortal Kombat Annihilation set the bar so very, very low. It's especially disappointing because the original 1995 Mortal Kombat movie was actually pretty good, and was the first inkling that movies based on video games could be halfway decent if handled properly. While Mortal Kombat already has its own happy ending spoiled in that movie's final moments, with Shao Kahn interrupting the victory celebrations to set the stage for his attack in the sequel, 1997's Annihilation still took things to another level. In a moment that has shocked and angered gamers across the world, Shao Kahn murders Johnny Cage, one of the original movie's main heroes, literally minutes into the sequel. Of course, this puts an end to the budding relationship between him and Sonya Blade. The Mortal Kombat film franchise itself was also murdered by this movie, and it would take an astounding 24 years for it to be resurrected with its reboot in 2021. Perhaps it was asking too much to let Dante Hicks catch a break, as being beaten down by life at every turn is basically what defines him as a character in the Clerks franchise. Still, fans thought that maybe he had at least finally gotten his love life situated by the end of 2006's Clerks II, leaving behind the fiancée he clearly wasn't right for in favor of his manager at movies, Becky. Between getting engaged to Becky and starting a business with his best friend Randall, Clerks II actually seemed to be setting up a pretty good life for Dante. Despite the release of posters and trailers for 2022's Clerks III featuring Becky, it's revealed in the film's opening minutes that Becky was killed by a drunk driver in the time that had passed since the last movie. To make things even more tragic, we also learn that she was pregnant with the couple's child at the time.
We only knew each other for like 15 minutes. You've been mourning me for like 15 years.
So, what do you want me to do? You want me to just forget about you?
Filmmaker Kevin Smith has never been afraid to take his comedies into dark territory, but this might have been the most upsetting twist he has ever put into one of his films. That's saying a lot, considering he also made the horror movie Tusk. The 1984 original Ghostbusters entered the titular team having saved New York City and the entire world from the malevolent Gozer. Once it had become common knowledge that ghosts were real and that Peter Venkman and his team had the means to effectively bust them, the Ghostbusters should have been able to keep plenty busy, forever respected for their past, present, and future heroics. Instead, 1989's Ghostbusters II starts with the first hint of that spectral slime that will surely require the Busters to be called into action. However, that eerie opening is immediately followed by another scene that sees Ray and Winston performing at a child's birthday party to make ends meet. The kids even boo the two former heroes of humanity, immediately establishing the Ghostbusters as lame has-beens, despite their incredible accomplishments 5 years prior. The two main protagonists of 2012's Wreck-It Ralph, Ralph and Vanellope, both feel like they don't belong in their respective arcade games. Over the course of the movie, though, they each learn how to make a living in their own games on their own terms. Ralph goes to great lengths to help Vanellope learn that she isn't just a glitch, finally making her feel a sense of belonging. Then there's the 2018 sequel, Ralph Breaks the Internet. 6 years later, we find that Vanellope is feeling bored of Sugar Rush, and she ends up causing the game's steering wheel to break when she rebels against the player's input. What starts out as a movie about Ralph helping Vanellope find a way to fix Sugar Rush quickly becomes about him finding a loophole that will let her move to a completely different game instead, the more exciting and violent Slaughter Race. Even after Sugar Rush is fixed, Vanellope decides to stay in Slaughter Race instead, essentially rendering all the lessons learned and rules established in the first movie moot. In 1984, Daniel LaRusso was fighting for a lot of things in the first Karate Kid movie. Confidence, respect from his peers, praise from his sensei. But perhaps most crucially, he was seemingly fighting for the right to date a girl named Ali Mills. Like a true 1980s underdog, Daniel eventually wins both the All Valley Karate Tournament as well as the girl. No, a woman shouldn't be a prize to be won, but again, this was the 1980s. Come the Karate Kid Part 2. And it turns out that Ali wasn't his prize to keep anyway. She's nowhere to be seen in the 1986 sequel or its 1989 follow-up, with only brief mention of her having left Danny on prom night for a college football player. Fortunately, Ali's reputation would later get some much-needed redemption when she showed up in the Karate Kid sequel series, Cobra Kai, to finally give her side of the story about her breakup with Daniel. Ralph Macchio admitted in a 2022 interview with The Guardian that he regrets having not advocated for actor Elizabeth Shue back in the 80s, when producers decided not to ask her back after the first movie. In one of the most perfectly heartstring-tugging movie endings of all time, 2010's Toy Story 3 wrapped up Pixar's first trilogy with Andy playing with his beloved toys one last time before passing them on to Bonnie. It's a bittersweet moment, but Andy and the audience should be comforted to know that the young girl will love them and play with them for many years to come. Andy looking back at Woody one last time as he drives away is the kind of moment that requires a hard swallow, whether you're seeing it for the first time or the 10th. While the overall consensus is that 2019's Toy Story 4 ended up somehow justifying its existence despite how perfect of a conclusion Toy Story 3 was, there's little denying how upsetting it is when the fourth installment gets going. We catch back up with Bonnie only a short time later, and she's already over many of Andy's old toys. We were left to assume that the gang was going to get the kind of attention they hadn't gotten since Andy's childhood, only to discover that a number of the toys had already been shoved into a closet. Ask any longtime Alien fan when they think the franchise first started to go downhill, and they'll probably tell you it began with Alien III. But what made David Fincher's 1992 threequel so unliked by audiences and critics? It probably had something to do with the premature deaths of a few beloved characters. While James Cameron's Aliens adds even more xenomorphs to the mix, it also includes Ellen Ripley to the rough and tumble crew of the USS Sulaco. Among them are Corporal Hicks and the scientist android Bishop, who help rescue little orphan Newt from the alien hordes and manage to survive till the end. The film ends with a spark of hope. Perhaps our heroes may be able to move on and establish their own little found family.
Are we gonna sleep all the way home?
All the way home.
Alien 3 doesn't hold on to that hope for long. The opening of the film depicts the group's escape pod crashing into a maximum security prison, killing Hicks, Bishop, and most tragically of all, Newt. The majority of viewers came to hate the opening to Alien 3, and director David Fincher ended up being one of them. He told The Guardian, "I had to work on it for 2 years, got fired off it 3 times, and had to fight for every single thing. No one hated it more than me. To this day, no one hates it more than me."